You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Yeah, because I mean, you would have started your resistance training for something, right? Like you wrestling. That's where you started.
Right. That's where, yeah, it all started. And like, honestly, it was just to like try and beat up my dad and brother too. There's a lot of competition in the household where I grew up.
Can I
But
tell you something? You
yeah,
posted a video last holidays of your brother squatting, and how you two came from the same parents is absolutely beyond my comprehension.
he's built like if a caveman had a child with a Middle Eastern bowling ball.
Yeah, wow. Wow, you've been working on that one. That was on a Christmas card somewhere. That was you've been workshopping that. Yes. I
That's
was
my
just like,
brother.
who is this? Oh, clearly by like you can always tell when you see someone in sweatpants that they have like your brother has dress sweatpants. Like your brother would show up to like I could just tell when I saw him squatting in sweatpants. I'm like, okay, those are his workout sweatpants, but these are a part of a much more sophisticated wardrobe of sweatpants.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
for
remember messaging you being like, because you and I are having so many similarities, which for those of you listening at home, Jordan and I have the same middle name. We're born just outside of a week apart. We're same year. We went to the same school. We have the same undergrad. We have the same grad school degree. We both got into strength sports. And one of the things that we both have a sibling that I think is the same. Our siblings are the same age, if I'm not mistaken.
about year 10 months. Me and my brother.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's about the same. So a ton of similarities uh, with that, and just I honestly fucking blanked on where I was even going with the amount of similarities we have. But you and I have more in common than you and your brother.
Oh,
Like your
absolutely.
blood brother. I remember watching you training with him and messaging you, and this is where I was going with it. Our closest friends, and we didn't know this until like a years after becoming friends, starting the business and all that.
Yeah.
What our closest friends growing up, and one of the few people that we both still stay in touch with, now mind you, these are different people, is named Shane.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
So your closest friend from back home is named Shane. You've like stood at his wedding. My closest friend from back home is also Shane. So like a scary amount of similarities. I'd never seen a picture of the gentleman, at least to my knowledge. And last holidays, you were squatting in like, a Pennsylvania basement gym.
Yes.
And I assumed this large ankled individual was Shane, hood up, sweatpants, workout sweatpants. And you're like, no, that's my brother.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Insane, dog.
Insane. See, yeah, there's a distinction that I made at one point in my life. I'm like, all right, my brother's probably going to be involved in a shooting at some point, so I'm going to create a little bit of distance on the public facing, just so that doesn't blow back on me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah,
Just his general sweatpant demeanor and his access to weapons in the state of Pennsylvania is like if you had to make a mathematical equation for a public shooting, that would be pretty damn close.
yeah. I think he had a gun in his sweatpants while he was squatting.
While he
I'd be
was
surprised
squatting,
if he didn't. Yeah.
hey, you got to stay strapped, man. You got to stay strapped. Um, yeah. Well, so you started working out for wrestling,
Correct. Yeah.
right? And I started training for hockey.
Mhm.
And I don't, because now with social media, the idea that people enter into working out for the arbitrary prize of working out,
To post on social media, I think is why
which
they
like
go
didn't
with
like, and it sounds so crazy to say at the, I don't know, the ripe age of 34 years old, that we grew up with, I started training years before I owned a cell phone,
that. Yeah,
let,
absolutely.
let alone one
Probably.
that.
Oh fuck, almost a decade, dude.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you were in there early. You were like 12 or something, 11, 12 when you started training.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe
Right.
like six years or so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember getting my first phone with a camera. Would have been an early generation iPhone. But like I had a cell phone that didn't record, but you could change the ringtone to the Mexican hat dance. You could play Snake on it and you could call
Snake,
your
yeah.
mother. Yeah, that was it.
Right.
The Nokia brick phone. That was the go-to.
Yeah.
So it training was always an adjunct for me. And it can be difficult to navigate conversations with people who haven't had that experience because in the evolution of both of our training over time, we both went from training for a sport
Mm-hmm.
to training being the sport.
Yeah.
Right, I with powerlifting and you with CrossFit, and I think your experience with CrossFit creates CrossFit creates an interesting problem to solve. And it's a problem that I think a lot of general population people run into. They run into it when they train for CrossFit. They run into it when they sort of just adopt training as a part of air quote like healthy lifestyle. And that's this idea of concurrent training goals. Right. So CrossFit being this, I remember you said it once on a podcast with Pat Barber back like early days. Remember we went out to Santa Cruz and we did that interview at his house, somehow figured it out.
Yeah.
And you use the word multimodal, I think was the first time I heard that word used, and I didn't really understand what it means, but it's like there are so many different sub disciplines to the sport of CrossFit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The gymnastics component, the cardiovascular component, the Olympic weightlifting, the powerlifting component. So it has a bunch of what you would call concurrent training goals, where there are going to have to be sacrifices with the recovery bank that you can use to make these deposits in your training. And you were posed with like, okay, I need to, in the early days, I need to strength train to get to be a better wrestler, which is like a pretty, honestly, when you're a kid, it's a pretty straight line. Like if I just get stronger, and especially in a sport like wrestling, which is, for like, I went to a wrestling high school. Like we were one of the best in the country at wrestling, not me personally, but I was used to the wrestling room, cauliflower ear crowd of just really violent people with no necks. And it's like,
My people.
there's a ton of skill in wrestling, but that skill gets magnified tenfold every ounce of strength you pack on to someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to watch you go for training for the sport to training from the sport, but I think it gives you a good insight into what a lot of people want to get out of their training. Like most general population people have, without knowing this is what they have concurrent training goals. How is it that you advise people, or what are the shortcomings, or what are the conversations you have to have? Because I got an email from a dude this weekend about he's going to be running a marathon, but wants to keep the aerobic base that he will build from preparing for this marathon when getting back into conventional training. How do you feel or begin to feel this conversation with people?
Yeah, I think that depends on their training age, to be honest, and how long they've been doing what they're doing. Because this is, in my mind, like a beginner to intermediate conversation. No one gets to advanced without having this conversation, because advanced is specialization, right? You don't get to advanced without specializing and organizing your training in a way that's going to allow you to amplify the things that you're good at. But I think if I were to boil this down, the idea around concurrent training, it really boils down to energy systems to me, right? And I think CrossFit is a good example with this. Is say you have enough water to fill 5 glasses, but there's 10 glasses in front of you. Like there's going to be some that you can fill up more. There's going to be some that have to be filled up less because of that, right? Or you can fill them equally across, but you're never going to be great at, or you're never going to have a full cup unless you take away from other cups, right? And that's kind of a pretty low level analogy. But if we're talking strength, endurance, and maybe power is a good one to think of as well. Think of the energy systems that you're going to have to maximize to be able to maximize an adaptation in any one of these areas. That's your pitcher of water, right? Is that your ability to train, your ability to resist fatigue and adapt to it and recover. That's going to be your pitcher of water. And you have your 3 glasses, maybe enough water to fill 1.5 of them. You're not going to be able to maximize any of these things fully unless you take away from those other 2, because the training that it's going to take to maximize one of these things directly conflicts with the training it's going to take to maximize another one of these things. And that's the part that people miss, is that there's a direct conflict of interest in getting better at one of these things. And the conflict is you need to allocate resources to getting better at that you would allocate to resources of getting better at another thing. And that's not to say that people can't have great endurance, have great power output, and be very strong. And like there's a single person that comes into my brain when I think about that. And he's been on the podcast before, Blaine McConnell. Dude's a fucking unit. This guy is nuts. But at the same time, if we're talking like if Blaine McConnell's gold standard, then from here we got to think of, okay, this is all in Blaine McConnell units. Like if he wants to maximize his power clean, it's going to take away from his 10K time. It's going to take away from his 1 rep max back squat because he needs to shuttle those resources into power clean, right? Versus if he wants to increase his 1 rep max back squat, he needs to take resources from these other two. And he's not going to be able to maximize those at the same time where he's maximizing a strength adaptation. And same thing with endurance, right? It's proportionate to you. It's not proportionate to performance in these goals overall. So like if you want to maximize your performance in one area, it's going to be a direct conflict with spreading those adaptations across different energy systems. And when I say energy systems, I mean like the way that your body breaks down food resources and creates energy at the muscular level. Like we have our creatine phosphate system, which is going to be like that power system, like very short bursts, high power output, low duration. We have our glycolytic system, which is going to be more like the strength. It's a little bit slower. We're going to get a little bit less peak power, but it's going to be more sustainable. And then we have our oxidative system, right? We can use creatine phosphate, we can use sugar, or we can use oxygen for energy, right? If we want to maximize any one of these adaptations, then it's going to take away from our efficiency in creating energy through the other ones. And that's what it boils down to in my mind.
Yeah, it's the idea of like lifting age, chronological and lifting, I think is where you need to start. There's a saying, I believe it's from Super Training, which is Mel Siff and Verkhoshansky, kind of like a standard issue reading if you get into the industry. If you haven't read it, read it. Siff and Verkhoshansky, Super Training. And the comparison is if your body, or the analogy is, if your body was a bank, you would never do business there, right? It's essentially trying to highlight this idea of diminishing returns, where it's, in order to, if you have a ton of money and you invest, you get better interest rates because you have more money, you can invest more money, you return more on your investments. You put $1 billion in a bank and you're returning on 10% or S&P 12 or whatever it is, that's going to be way better than if you have no money and you're going to get shitty rates. But your body's the opposite of that. So if you are rich in adaptation and you've made particular strides, you do not get the favorable interest return on the deposits made. You get the opposite of that. Your interest rates go down and you accrue slower the more of this physical wealth you've created for yourself. Mm-hmm. So you need to be specific. Now, the thing is, there's forks in the road with adaptations, right? Like the one that always comes to mind, and like the first question I ask is, I'm going to take a slightly different stance on this, is training age is a part of it. And a lot of training age can be boiled down to chronological age, but kind of to the wrestling analogy out of the gate, or your experience with wrestling, it's the idea of lifting age comes in past a certain chronological age. Because to me, it's like when I'm being posed this question, are you under the age of like maybe even 25? I think 25 is a good place to start because your brain is still kind of fucking soup, right? Most 25-year-olds are still, and I can, please allow me, I can attest as a person who was 25 and younger, I was retarded. Not that I'm much smarter now, but it's like your brain is literally soup until you're 25, and then things start to like close up for you. And then you realize how soup your brain is at 26, and then you go through multiple panic attacks and end up in the hospital. But it's like, okay, let's give you till 25. If you're before the age of 25, now barring some competitive endeavor that requires a specialization in these systems, if you are trying to be well-rounded, and some logic and science to back this, strength is the way you can currently train up to 25 years old. Like if I had to, and like given the limitations of resources as you kind of laid out, if I had to pick something that is going to move the needle pretty much across the board, right? Just being stronger than the mass you are is going to make I always think of this video that went out years ago when Hafthor Bjornsson was doing snatches in some CrossFit class. Do you remember that? And it was like maybe 185, whatever that is in kilos. And like, it was too light to have good technique relative to his strength, frankly, right? It was just, it would have been more energy inefficient if he had gotten into some starting snatch position as you would lifting something 90% plus. The 185 was so just like hilariously light to him that he was just kind of doing like a weird hingy front raise with 185 pounds. And it's like, okay, right. This is what efficiency looks like in concurrent adaptation for youth. So if you want to talk power, if you want to talk speed, if you want to talk agility, if you want to talk even to certain degree endurance, and it gets a little bit gray when we start to talk about like aerobic and anaerobic capacity, but it's like, if you're so much stronger than you are heavy, your strength, you have an easier time moving your body through space, much like Hafthor having an easier time moving a 185-pound barbell through space because he's just so absurdly strong, right? So when we talk about concurrent training, it is useful because I think one of the things that robs a lot of people of progress is sort of this order of operations or early specialization. Right. We know this from a very sports skill perspective. Like, there are a lot of people who are against early specialization in athletics, right? Go through East Texas and see how many kids are getting their elbows cut open at like 14 years old. It's like, why? Because those kids that used to throw baseballs in the summer and play football in the winter and then run track and field and then play baseball again are now, at 10 years old, they're on a pitch count. And all they do is baseball because their parents are some toddlers and tiaras fucking coach that's trying to get them to the major league. So it's like there is in the skill of sports a massive benefit to delaying specialization, and I think that's true outside of sports and either training for sport or training in general. That we should be looking towards higher levels of variability. But the thing we're trying to push uphill in early stage adaptation, physical adaptation, is going to be strength until a certain point. Then it's like, okay, well, given your lifting age past a certain chronological age, you need to accept a certain amount of trade-off. Or like I like to frame things in the way of preconditions. The precondition to being the strongest possible version of yourself is going to be a sacrifice in your aerobic capacity. Hard stop. The precondition to being the best aerobic version of yourself, you want to go run a 5, 10, half marathon, full marathon, is you are going to have to be someone who does not focus on top end strength. And the flip side of that is if you are someone who wants to maintain a certain level of what seemingly would be from an energy system, maybe not opposing like opposite, but opposing in the sense of combating for resources, right? It's hard to say that cardio and strength are necessarily opposites to one another. I think it's a little bit more multi-dimensional. You can't draw a straight line between this is here and this is here. There's a lot going on in the body. There's some things that are obviously complementary to a degree. There's some things that are obviously deleterious to a degree. But let's just say in competition with the goal of being the strongest or the most, fit or aerobically fit, you need to understand that if you want to keep the opposite side of the aisle, you are sacrificing how far you could be able to push the other adaptation. So it's to say, if I was to want to run a marathon, but keep my relative strength, I either need to accept that I'm going to lose some strength and run less than what I'm capable of marathon, or I'm going to lose a lot of strength and run a marathon that I am far more capable of performing, but need to do so in the absence of a lot of the strength that I've built. And this is especially true when we start to talk about hypertrophy, because I liked when you were going through your initial list of adaptations, talking about strength, talking about power, talking about speed, that you left hypertrophy out of it, because hypertrophy is really a byproduct adaptation to training, right? It's something where it's like watching people argue about hypertrophy training is like watching people argue about the way they brush their teeth. It's like, okay, do you brush your teeth for like 2 minutes twice a day? Then, okay, you're probably going to be okay. Do you like lift weights kind of for like 45 minutes a day, a couple days a week? Okay, you're probably going to put on some sort of muscle. Like why people lose friends over like how to brush your teeth, AKA how to put on muscle, is actually hilarious because they're easy adaptations to make. You could trip off a fucking sidewalk and put on muscle. Now,
Right.
peak power, peak aerobic capacity, these things take a little bit more nuance to achieve in their fullest realized potential. But I think when you're looking at, the let's call them opposing adaptations of power and endurance, you need to draw a line of how mediocre you're willing to be in one of these things to fill the other cup as much as possible.
Yeah. And I think there are fringe cases of this where having better endurance will make you stronger, or having better strength will give you better endurance. But there are people who have already specialized. And the conversation then needs to be around the degree, right? I've like a good example is like a competitive power lifter, someone who is incredibly strong. Maybe they're reaching the top of their training capacity for what they can do and what they can recover from. Someone like that, it's not going to help their top end strength to train for a marathon, but it may help their top end strength in terms of training capacity and recoverability to get 8 to 10,000 steps a day. And that's where the degree of these adaptations starts to matter, is that if you have a better idea or a better capacity to recover in between sets, that's actually going to be a positive enhancement with your strength training versus someone that runs marathons but they're hurt all the time and they have real shit hip stability and they don't have any muscle on their body. Then it may be beneficial for them to have 1 or 2 days a week of strength training or like lower body function and core training in their regimen, but they're not like loading up a bar to 4 plates or 5 plates. They're probably doing like body weight or like light dumbbell lunges and things like that, or like change of direction or unilateral stability stuff to enhance that adaptation, because there is a deficit in something that's causing them to not be well-rounded enough to continue to train the thing that they need to train to get better at to the capacity that they're capable of. So there are fringe cases where that is actually the issue, is that they need to have a bit more concurrency in their training. But I think, and you touched on it, I think one of the important conversations, the most relevant conversation I'd say throughout my coaching career, has been beginner to intermediate level athletes that are somewhere in strength or hypertrophy or aesthetic training, that the opposing adaptations that they want is they want to build muscle or be stronger, and they also want to be leaner and have less body fat. And that's everyone's goal when they get into training, right? Everyone that doesn't have any real training aspirations, it's I want to be bigger, stronger, and leaner all at the same time, and they want everything right now. But that's the one that it poses the biggest opposition in my mind, because if we're going to, if just put it in simple terms, if we want to do hypertrophy training, we want to put on muscle, but we also want to lose fat, somehow you want there to be more of you and less of you at the same time, which required two completely different inputs for that to happen. Like for me to build muscle, I need to have a surplus of calories and amino acid building blocks in my blood that I can actually recover from my workout. That is hypertrophy training is breaking down muscle, right? We're breaking down our muscle and then we're recovering from it. We're rebuilding it at a greater capacity so we can adapt and we can withstand that stress of hypertrophy training to a greater degree in due time. Fantastic hypertrophy training. Now, losing body weight, because losing body weight and losing body fat are the same thing, right? I'm sorry, losing body fat and losing body weight. There's no distinction of difference here. It's because when you lose body fat, you're going to lose body weight, and some of that's going to be fat, some of that's going to be a lot of that's going to be water, but some of that's going to be muscle as well, right? You can't distinguish. I'm going to just lose body fat with the way that I'm training or the way that I'm inputting the stimulus into my body of less calories, less recoverability is what that comes down to. So I think that's the most common conversation I have around this, about people that want these two goals concurrently, but they're in direct opposition of each other. Is that you're not going to be able to, and there are, again, fringe cases to everything. This isn't a complete absolute. There are people who maybe have excess body fat and a lower amount of muscle that can cause these two things to happen at the same time. But for your average training person with average training goals and an average lifestyle, there's going to be a very low capacity to do both of these things simultaneously. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't change body composition in a favorable way where it might look like you're more muscular because you have less body fat. But if you truly want to add muscle and you truly want to get stronger, the thing that's going to oppose that the most is being in a caloric deficit, right? It becomes that same conversation, is that you only have so many resources. What do you want to allocate them to? Do you want to allocate the resources of food into building muscle, or do you want to restrict the resource of food into losing body weight? So I think that's, in my mind, the conversation that I've had the most amount of times around conflicting goals with training.
Yeah, there's a timeliness factor that is going to have to be had, right? Like
Yes.
whether it's I want to be a marathon, I want to do a marathon, and I want to, maintain my aerobic capacity. I think being very finite with your tools and instruments of measurement is paramount to like the success or failure of this endeavor. And I think that's where a lot of people really go awry, is like, don't really have a metric. They know like they want to, and rightfully so, like if you're going to run a marathon and, it's a bit far off of your physical capacity right now, you are going to have to put in a lot of work for that to be something you can take to completion. You do not want to see that work squandered. So you want to maintain that as best you can. It's like, I understand it in principle, but it's okay. What is your goal then on the other side of it? Because like, why don't you just keep running marathons? You want the best way to keep your aerobic fitness after running a marathon? Just prepare for your next marathon and you're going to be right as rain. You don't have to worry about it because you keep pushing that adaptation. You have this specialization now. Now, long term, you're going to need to look at the bottlenecks of what comes with marathon runners, what's going to stop them from completing marathons in the future if they run too many of them. Well, stress fractures, right? This metabolic state that's going to leach your bones. It's going to put a lot of undue stress, especially in that transitory period as you start to adopt the size and shape of someone who runs marathons, right? Like that is where marathon running is its most dangerous, is when people start and they don't look like East Africans, right? It's like when you're running marathons and you're still just fucking Joe from accounting. It's like, okay, you're unskilled at the thing. Your technique is dog shit, and people like don't respect that running technique has a bearing on the safety of running, which is insane. If any skill-based exercise has, I saw someone running the other day and literally had this thought driving down Lakeshore in Toronto, just being like, the number of people that just pick this up is crazy to me. Like they just like, I know what I'm going to do to exercise the least efficiently for my goals. The most dangerous thing I don't know how to do. And it's like, how culturally did, like, it was like Forrest Gump. Then all of a sudden everyone started going for a jog. Like, how did we land on like everyone just accepting this all in activity that is so, there was a book called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, maybe was his name. Really interesting book. And it was a little bit about barefoot running and kind of like, heeded the warnings of like, hey, look, we've evolved with mattresses on our feet. Like maybe we don't, like, I believe they spoke of the Tarahumara tribe in the Copper Canyons of Mexico and how they could run the equivalent of waking up in Detroit and running to New York City.
Oh,
that was like, dude, it was like imagine the most badass, like Amazonian bar mitzvah of all time. This is how you became a man in this tribe, is you got smashed drunk off of like, I think a tequila similar that was rendered from a cactus, like some sort of fermented cactus. So your tribe gets you absolutely shit hammered. And then you wake up the next day as if you woke up in Detroit, Michigan, Jefferson Avenue, shout out 8 Mile, and you ran to Manhattan. Like imagine like a bar mitzvah. I have obviously friends of the show that are Jewish. They kind of like the relatives get them together and start cutting a bunch of checks. Couple of prayers, someone smashed the glass, mazel tov, l'chaim, and we're off to the races. Generational wealth. These guys are like, no, you want to become a man? Yeah, run from Joe Louis Arena to Madison Square Garden with a hangover. And it's like, well, they've evolved to do that, right? Like this idea that people pick up running as their first foray into exercise is like, do you have aspirations of reaching your goals? Or are you trying to like do the most inefficient thing possible? It blows my mind how that's just been a cultural norm for for decades now, that people just get into this. Like we'll see this now as the year transitions over into 2025, that people will commit to a exercise regimen that includes running. Now, look, is running safe? By the numbers, depending on what stats you use, I think it's, if you run 3 times a week, and I'm trying to remember the statistic from the book, it's probably a decade or better since I've read it last. 83% of people who run more than 3 days a week will succumb to an injury within 1 year of running that leaves them incapable of running 3 times a week. So it's like, that is like the divorce statistic times 10. That is a very inefficient thing that you are entering into. However, it can be done, right? It can be done with just like the reason that statistic is what it is because that's basically the statistic in my mind of human intelligence. That's just like, if you take a less than stupid approach, you can absolutely run 3 to 4 times a week for many, many years on end. It's just like having the foresight to know where the wheels come off, right? And I think strength training as an adjunct rather than a concurrent goal, strength training becomes an adjunct that allows you to specialize, not rather than a thing that it becomes its own pursuit. If strength training is a concurrent goal to some sort of cardiorespiratory goal, and inversely so with cardiorespiratory and strength, if you have concurrent training goals, the idea of goals and priorities, to me, these two words are not plural. These words don't exist in the English language as plurals. Someone tried to list off to me. I was talking to some kid about his business. Why? I don't know. He thought it would be an interesting conversation to have with me about business, which is like, we're not business. We own a business. We're not business people. You know why we're not business people? Because we own a business. Right. That's why I'm not a business guy, because I'm too fucking busy running our business with you and Matt. Right. This is why. So I'm like having this conversation. He's like, all right, so here's my priorities. I'm like, what the fuck did you just say? Your priority? I don't know that word. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, he's like, these are what I'm trying to prioritize. You get one, dog. You get one. The rest of it's masturbation. Carry on. What is your priority? And he's like, you can't. And in training is the same thing. If you are prioritizing your training goal, you can then see where concurrent training will push that goal uphill, and it allows you to dose that appropriately. So if you're really thinking about, you have a training goal of running a marathon, strength training could be a part of that priority. But when strength training becomes a secondary priority, you now have 0 priorities. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it, because it's prioritizing. It dictates an order, right? There's a number one priority, and then things are going to have to fall in line after that. Like, yes, you may want to accomplish different things, but there's going to be one thing governing that. Like, you're going towards one thing, and then the things underneath that better support that number one priority or that number one goal, right? And it's just not intelligent if they don't. Like, it's ignorance. And I think that's what a lot of people have around training, is that they just don't understand. They don't get it. So that, to me, it helps kind of the point that you made earlier about timeliness of this. I think that helps guide the priority of training, or the priorities. If you have multiple things that you want to accomplish, like, cool, because I've had multiple things that were a priority to me at different points in my training, and they didn't necessarily align at the same time. But as I look at it over the grand scheme of my training career, which is like decades at this point, I was able to prioritize the thing that was most important to me at that time. And at one time, it was sport performance for wrestling. At another time, it was the sport of CrossFit. Another time, it was the sport of weightlifting. So understanding that if you want to maximize these things, there's a way to go about it. And there's a very well-established order in the way that you need to go about it. And if the goal is, let's say, strength, if we have a strength goal, there's going to be a base level of endurance that you need to be able to be maximally strong, right? And you don't want that to dip below that threshold where it's now inhibiting your progress over here. But once it gets above that threshold, it's not a priority. Like that can drop off the list because you have a level of endurance that allows you to train the way that you need to train, right? And even if we're talking like a couple different ways to look at this is if we look at I think CrossFit is a good one to embody this, and then maybe Olympic weightlifting, right? Olympic weightlifting, like at the Olympics, you're going to see these people peak over a quad over 4 years to lift the best that they can on a given day, and then what's going to happen to that person? They're probably going to fall off the face of the earth for maybe a year, maybe more. Maybe that's it. Maybe they've peaked their career and they can no longer get progress out of this. But you cannot it's not necessarily the same as running a marathon. Well, I guess it kind of is, but like if we're talking like the best marathon runner ever, I'm not going to say it right. The 2 hour marathon. Who was the first?
Elliot Kipchoge.
Kipchoge.
Kipchoge. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I mean I've read the book about him and it's incredible. It's fucking sick. But you're not going to run a 159 marathon. And then you're not going to run a 158 marathon 2 months later, and then 157 2 months later. Like it doesn't work in that linear way. There is the diminishing returns. Like we're going to get that decreased interest rate over time. And the reason for that is because you can only peak so high with the foundation that you've built before you have to go back and you have to start and you have to broaden that foundation so that you can build that peak up higher and higher time over time. And that's like, if we're talking weightlifting at the Olympics, like there are adaptations. There's general adaptations that we're going to need, and then they become more specific as we start to build, or as we have that base and we start to build towards that peak. That we're only going to build off the progress we've had until that point, and then once we build that peak higher than we've ever built it before, then we know we have kind of we have a mark in the sand of this is how far we can go. Now we need to go back. And the way that I like to look at this when I'm coaching, when I'm training people, when I'm training myself, is that there's markers along the way that are going to give you information on how you've progressed that base of the pyramid, and that will give you information on how high you can peak again. Like things that I'll use specific to Olympic weightlifting is I'll use like very early on the weight of the dumbbell I could do a set of 20 walking lunges with. Like if that has improved from one training cycle to the next training cycle, that's maybe not specific to the sport of Olympic weightlifting, but specific to hip function, specific to output in unstable positions. Like I have made an increase in a very general adaptation that will allow me to build this peak higher the next time. And then maybe a little bit more specific down the line, it's what is my 5 rep max front squat? And then maybe even more specific down the line, it's what is my 1 rep max power clean from the blocks? And then it progresses to, all right, has my clean pull increased? Has my 1 rep max squat increased? Has my clean increased? And these are all things that they're markers along the way that I can see that there is objective progress towards the goal of making this single adaptation better. And there are going to be things like other things outside of that is like, okay, what is my recoverability in between sets? Like what is sleep like? What is my general recovery? What is diet like? Like all these things, of course, play an impact into that. But there's adaptations along the way that are going to lead to building that peak higher. And they need to be adaptations that align with the end goal. I'm not checking my 5K time month over month and seeing how that lends to me being better at Olympic lifting, right? Versus CrossFit's almost, and we've had this conversation on the podcast before, it's almost the complete opposite, is that far off season, I want to get as strong as I can. I want to see my 1 rep max back squat improving, because what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take that maximal strength and I'm going to turn it into maximal relative strength down the line. Is that okay? If I can squat 315 for 20 reps, then, and that's like my mark in the sand, then I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to take my squat from 450 to 475, and now I can squat 330 for 20 reps. And it's going to be almost a reverse pyramid in that way, where we're taking these certain adaptations that are a mark in the sand. They're giving us an objective measure of progress, But then we're taking that adaptation and we're shifting it to the sport specific or the goal specific or priority specific goal that we want to prioritize with training. And there are going to be conflicts of interest along the way. So you can't necessarily have your cake and eat it too, as you mentioned earlier before we got on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, concurrent training really comes down to making the best decision on the day. And I think the timeliness of it is big, understanding kind of where you're at, where you're going, how long you have to get there. But I think being able to break things down into their component parts is huge. Because like you
Yeah.
mentioned, early off season CrossFit, you're going to try and get your back squat as heavy as possible. Now, you know how to program, you know how to periodize, you know where you are this cycle over last. But even that itself breaks down into a series of decisions that have to be made on a day-to-day basis to progress that one thing, because that one thing isn't one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain, if you're going to be prioritizing squat volume in that training block, you are going to have to maybe offset that with some accessory movements that are less loadable, maybe, open up a couple of movement options, just enough for you to keep squatting heavy, right? You're going to maybe take a fall on some things that you may need at the time of the competition, but you don't need right now. Right? You might deprioritize deadlifting and hinging movements to spare your low back and nervous system from exercises that are both globally and locally taxing on tissues and the system at large. So it's like, to say like, okay, in this line item approach of what do I need early off season? I need a bigger back squat to carry that into subsequent adaptations. Sure. But that's 4 to 6 to 8 weeks of micro decisions that manifest in exercise order, exercise selection, rep ranges, recovery demand, overall training frequency. Maybe you're running a 4-day a week split there, but then when you get to a gymnastics component of your prep for CrossFit, you're probably going to have to touch some high intensity squatting in order to keep that fire rolling, to stoke that system. We talked about that on the deconditioning podcast we did a couple of weeks ago. But now all of a sudden your training frequency and practicing a skill like gymnastics may be up to 6-7 sessions a week, because gymnastics isn't going to be something that's entirely taxing from any local tissue perspective or a global system perspective, but it requires a ton of repetition in order to get better at, especially if it's not a strong suit in your arsenal of skills you need, right?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to go high level and be like, okay, I'm going to break down my prep for a squat strength first, and then gymnastics, save Olympic weightlifting towards the end, because you're very well skilled at that particular subset. But each one of those subsets, as they fall in series, they also fall in sequence. Like once you've started spinning this plate of back squat strength, you need to keep that going in some capacity as you start to layer in these other skills. But the layering into the other skills isn't just deploying this single, the point on a spreadsheet of like, okay, this couple of weeks is going to be this now. It's like, no, that single point on a spreadsheet is a drop-down menu of its own, myriad of decisions around training on a day-to-day basis, what you're doing when you're not training, what your accessory movement looks like, that also has a front-loaded and retroactive or proactive superimposition to the adaptation you just practiced and pushed uphill and prioritized in that training block, and the one that you then have coming down the pipe. So it's a difficult challenge and requires a fair bit of know-how to do. But the know-how comes off the heels of the acceptance of what it is you're willing to sacrifice for what it is you want to gain, right? So you can have, and I've seen this time and again, especially when you laid out the very real day-to-day front of mind, I want to be leaner but bigger and stronger. Like, you know what usually happens? People look like fucking potatoes. That's what usually happens. Because like, look, and I've done this from a coaching perspective, and I promise I will never do it again. It's just a waste of my time. Like if someone is not committed, and I know how to have the conversation now. It's like, that shirt you're wearing, are you okay with your sleeves not being as tight as they are now? Because you're gonna look the exact same, if not worse, if the answer to that is, well, I don't know, man. If you're not okay with at a certain point walking around like you're wearing your big brother's clothes, then you're never going to get lean.
Yeah.
It's like, and I know that at a certain point in my life, that was true of like, I started putting on my extra large shirts at one point when I was a fair bit smaller, and going like, oh, these are not as snug as they used to be. And I just started eating again. Right. And I was just like, all right, I'm going to start eating again. And now like the shirts just filled up with fatness. And I was like, well, I feel better when I have my shirt on. I'll go into a public pool with my shirt on because I'm a fat piece of shit. But like, so it's like, are you like, there's a real conversation to have about how committed are you? Because it's not that is the hardest part. Like it is not complicated, but it is complex. And it blows my mind how people do not understand the difference between those two things. It takes management. Complex systems take management. Things that are complicated require, a series of intricate answers, but you ultimately get to a solution, right? Things that are complicated can plug and play at a certain point. If you plug the right values, you'll end up in where you want to go. Things that are complex are adaptive. They're in integrated systems of cycling systems. Like you need to understand that this is a complex process, not a complicated process, but you need to understand the complexities of it. And they're not what they seem when people get into these endeavors. Because it's like, again, to double back, like a lot of people get into that concurrent training goal of like this impossible triad of things to do all at once. Like usually when most people are like, hey, I want to be like bigger, but leaner and stronger. It's like, all right, you need to lose about 25 pounds of that's what you need first. Like that's regardless of your goal, like you're not going to put on muscle because you're too fat. Your hormones are fucked from being a fat piece of shit. So we need to get you like lean, not even like lean. We just need to get you less fat is the first goal. You'll feel a little bit bigger. It'll take you like 3 days to not want to eat dessert. And then it'll take you about another 3 weeks to feel like you're actually making progress. The first 3 weeks, you're kind of just going to feel like a pancake. You're not going to have the same like available energy. Your body's going to be making adaptations and actually burning fat, but you'll notice none of it other than the fact that you just kind of look like a drab water balloon potato pancake. And then after like a month of like kind of not eating like a dirt bag, you'll start to notice that yes, your sleeves don't fit, but like you have a vein in the back of your hand that you never had before. And then we're just going to do that for like another 4 months. And then maybe you'll look like something that is kind of a respectable human being that works out and isn't just skinny because they're malnourished. Like that's like kind of the process that people need to go through. But it's like, until I went through it enough with myself and with other people, I couldn't explain that those were going to be the barriers. Yeah. Like day 3, yo, where are we at? Dog, Uber Eats got me again. It's like 3 days, dog, 3 days. We're talking 3 days. You could say this one for 3 days. So I tell people now, look, give me 3 days and don't be, and once we get to a week, you're going to be cooking. Except after the next week, you're going to be hitting me up being like, hey, why aren't I in shape yet? This is 2 times the amount of the 3 days you promised me of not eating dessert. It's like, now then comes the next hard part. Yeah. Where you're going to look like shit and not have a ton of energy because you're used to eating in a surplus and we're eating like what a human should. So it's being able to have those conversations about the complexities of it. So many people love getting their rocks off and like in being complicated. Well, the thermogenic and the non-exercise, and it's like, my guy, if you don't have the 3-day conversation, you're going to look like shit for a month conversation, you're not going to see any progress, but the scale's good. If you don't have those conversations, you are thinking the human body is a complicated system rather than a complex system. And I've done it. But trust me, when you are shooting for the concurrent goal unicorn of I want to get leaner but bigger and stronger, like you have to have the conversation about what's going to trip up the complex system, not have this like academic highfalutin like systematic calculation about what's going to prove the complicated equation. It's like you deal with humans, dog. It's just never going to work.
Yeah, that's so true. And the human psyche will fuck things up 100% of the time. That's the hardest part of all of it. Because like, man, I just went through it. Like I got into training through wrestling, and then through wrestling, I went through a bodybuilding phase, back into strength training, back into CrossFit, back into weightlifting, and now into more of a strength phase. And like throughout that, like I've always been pretty lean, and I enjoy being lean. Like I like the way that I look when I'm lean. And I just went through a phase where I'm like, fuck it, I want to get strong, and I'm gonna do what it takes to get strong. And like I'm sitting at the highest body fat I've been at probably since fucking middle school, maybe even before middle school right now. But you know what? That's because I shifted my priorities and I'm like, I'm going to get strong. Like my priority is to squat 500 plus pounds and I'm going to do what it takes to get there. And I fucking got there and I did that at the expense of body composition because I couldn't have my cake and eat it too there. Like I'm like, I need to put on the weight. There's no way to do this if I
Y'all were
don't do
eating
this.
cake. You were eating
I was,
cake, dog.
I was
Yeah,
eating
yeah,
cake,
yeah,
man. I was
yeah.
eating cake on cake. Like
People
ask my
were
fasted
messaging me,
blood glucose.
dude. People were messaging me like, "Yo, is that you breathing heavy on the pod?" I'm like, "Nah, G, nah, it ain't me. It's not me this time." That
Yeah,
used to be a problem,
I know,
and
bro.
now it's a problem, and it's a you problem, which makes
It's
me
a
feel good. I
it's a
just
me
assume
problem.
one day we're both just going to be 230. That's going
Yeah,
to be like how this levels out.
let's meet there, man. But shit,
Whew.
that's the thing. And like you said, that the part that's the hardest of this process is buying into it when you don't see the results of it. Right? It's bound to fail before you see the results because you're doing the work it takes to get the results, but you're not getting the results. Right? The first 4, 6, 8 weeks of that build, like I'm like,
Preach.
shit, man. Yeah, I'm fluffy. Like I'm getting fat, but I'm not getting strong. Like I'm still hitting the same numbers I was hitting. And like there's a ramp up in that strength phase. But the ramp up in the diet was faster. And I'm like, shit, like I feel like garbage right now and I'm not seeing the progress. Like you need to buy into that process and you need to accept there's going to be collateral along the way if you want to really prioritize your priority singular of for me it was getting stronger and I'm like all right, I need more body if I want to squat more weight, so I better make more body and that will lead to squatting more weight. But it's not the other way around. It's not like I'm not going to just do what I'm doing and somehow get stronger. Like you have to make that sacrifice.
I'm glad you highlighted that you enjoyed being lean before, because I think it's hard for people to hear that and be like, "No, I could do that. Like I could definitely commit to eating more weight and not see." Because that's where most people live their life. But it's like, no, that's hard for you. Like you do enjoy being lean, and that was a precondition you understood to strong people, right?
Right.
Like I always said, one of the record for the best squat should go to the guy who squats over 1,000 pounds but has the smallest circumference of head. I feel like that should be a record that we figure out of like as I know a
Bunch of
couple thousand
gargoyles
pound
out there
squatter, dude.
squatting.
It's insane, man.
Yeah.
Like full moon comes out, these guys are just stoned. It's wild. Like I just like I've had the pleasure to sit down and have dinner with Andrei Milanichev on numerous occasions. I've competed at meets with Vlad Alzahov, and like these are just gargantuan human beings, and it's like, but there is a prerequisite to squatting 1,000 pounds, and it's not ever being able to buy a fitted hat again. Like you can't like 5150 new era caps don't make size 48 hats or whatever, right? Like you need to get your hat fitted at a tailor. It's like wearing a suit jacket around your fucking cranium. Like it's these guys' heads are insanely large. I don't know what substance does that. I don't know if it's the McDonald's or the growth hormone or a combination therein, but it's like at some point someone looked at him like, "You sure you want to do what it takes to squat 1,000 pounds? You'll never wear a baseball hat again." And they said, "Fuck it, let's go." And
Right.
it's because there's so much. I mean, that's life though, which is kind of the nice. It's like, oh, you're going to do a lot of stuff for a long time and see no reward, and you're
Mhm.
just going to keep doing it. And it's like, yep, that's pretty much how it goes. I was told this thing once. I was in Australia. This is like early in my homelessness days. And this guy, I don't know if I've ever told the story on the podcast, but this guy, I met this dude. He was like financially independent. He was a firefighter who was well invested, and just now is like was retired, but was still a firefighter because he enjoyed the meaning of the job, but had made a shit ton of money. And he kind of could tell I was like going through it. Like, I guess I looked that lost and desperate at 27 years old. So you're like, oh, I got to give this guy a speech or something. He looks like he's about to kill himself. And he tells me this story. He's like, "Hey, look, I'm going to tell you something that helped me through tough times." And I was like, yeah, sure. And it stuck with me ever since. And it's part and parcel of the conversation we're having now. And he goes, "Okay, I'm going to give you a riddle." And I was like, "All right, bring it on." And he's like, "Okay, there's a pond that has zero algae in it, completely clear. And on day 0, completely clear, but on day 30, it's completely covered. And the algae doubles every day until the pond is covered. What day is the pond half covered?" And I sat there and like I tried to, I don't know, do a I don't know what I was doing. I didn't know which way was up at that point in my life. And I sat there just kind of perplexed. And I was like, I don't know, day 2, day 15. I'm trying to think logically through it. And he kind of looks at me and he goes, "Day 29." And then like kind of taps me on the shoulder, like, you'll be all right. And then walks out of the room. I was like, fuck, dude,
Yeah,
that
that's deep.
leveled me, dog. And I think about that. Like I thought about that a lot. So, I mean, that was the beginning of all of this, right? That was like when I was just on the road and we were trying to figure out what this company was. And I think about that a lot because it's like, to me, it still feels like day 29. But I think about that in any time I'm posed with a challenging situation. It's like, yeah, like if we're getting lean or if you're getting big or you're trying to get strong, there are going to be 29 days where it hasn't occurred. And then there's going to be the day that it occurs. And it's like, okay, that's what you're building towards. You're really building towards day 29. Because then the next day you wake up and it's fucking Christmas, and now you get to do the thing and achieve the thing. And it's something that I've been talking to people a lot about lately is the idea of outcome orientation. There has been such I'm going to make a reel of a podcast clip and it's going to be some motivational thing. I'm actually thinking about Sal DiStefano from Mind Pump. He like said something about walking. I pick on him all the time. Like it went mega viral. Like I legit think what happened was Chris Williamson picked it up, who has like a massive podcast, the Modern Wisdom podcast, unbelievable production value, great show, all that stuff. But Sal goes on, and it's funny because like we've been knowing Sal for like a decade. We knew Mind Pump like basically before they were Mind Pump. I remember meeting Adam when they were like episode 12. Now they're like episode 7,000 or something. And it was like, the man who enjoys walking. Oh man, I hope Sal hears this. The man who I can't even talk like him. It's fucking Italian. The man who enjoys walking will get further than the man who loves the destination. I was like, okay, I get it, but also you gotta love the destination. This whole process orientation thing, and I think about this because I don't want to be contrarian. I find contrarian thinking very unoriginal. It's like, what do you think? Okay, I think the opposite. But I genuinely, and like we would have to be, right? We have to be outcome oriented. Look at the path we chose. We chose to shovel shit for a decade, put ourselves in a shit ton of debt. Do you think we loved the process? No. Do you think I had the mental foresight and the philosophical state of mind as a shit scared, shit broke 23-year-old? You think there was I'm going to cross my kumbaya and my way to enjoying my life? 0% chance. My brain was soup and I was and still am retarded. So, but what I was able to grasp was the outcome. Was like, okay, there is an outcome orientation. Why am I doing this? It's not to, fall in love with, no, it was not that at all. I never once had that thought of like, oh man, you got to learn to love it. I just thought, fuck, 5 a.m. again. Here goes off to school. Another day in debt and another day closer to the thing that I want. At no point, I don't know about you, but at any point in school, did you fall in love with the process?
Fuck no, dude.
Get out of here. That's just an untenable lie to tell people. You see these people like just literally chewing metaphorical glass in their life going, very good year. Like it's the Grinch. It's like, are you doing this for something? Are you doing this to prove that you're some fucking stoic who just loves all the bullshit that they put at their own feet by their own self-choosing? You better like the outcome of this, dude. Like, because at a certain point, you're going to wake the fuck up and realize that you've been doing this for what? Collecting fucking brownie points for being the guy who can eat the most amount of glass or shovel the most amount of shit. It's like, no. Do it for something. Build it towards something. But like as many times as I see people who don't stick with the plan. I see people who stick with the plan to no end goal. Mm-hmm. And it's like it's equal either of those situations leads to someone who's unfulfilled. And it's like, okay, do you want the outcome? Start there, right? Like I want to run a marathon and I want to like keep my muscle. You don't have muscle and your dog shit running a marathon. Have you thought about Rubik's Cubes? Like start with a goal worth achieving. And I think that will, because there will be parts of the process. And that's where you don't struggle is, okay, squatting 500 pounds. Yes, that's a goal worth achieving, right? Competing at the levels you compete in sports. Yes, that's a goal worth achieving. But it's like, so I see people kill themselves for a color run and like, hey, look, if it means something to you, sure. But like have a think about before you start whatever this process is, if it's a thing. Cause I think too many people are getting sold on this, like, oh, you got to fall in love with the process. It's like, well, it's way easier to do that if the end goal is something worth having.
Right. Yeah,
It's
it's not
nuts,
about
man.
just a buying in blind into some process. There has to be some sort of result that is sought after by you, or else you're never gonna love what you're doing. And even like I do love working out, but there's days where I don't want to fucking do it. There's days where it's like the furthest thing from what I want to do, but I still do it because I have goals. There's shit that I want to accomplish. And like same thing with running a business. It's like, yeah, there's days that I just want to put a fucking shotgun in my mouth, and that would be much easier than the shit that I have to do. Yeah, right.
Today, probably tomorrow. Tomorrow's gonna
Weeks,
be tomorrow could be
months,
a shotgun
years.
day.
There's
We could be,
lifetimes.
yeah, we could be Kurt Cobain by the time this comes out with the week we got out of us.
Whatever, man. That's the outcome I'm looking for. No,
Jesus.
but seriously, like it's yeah, some of this shit is just shit. And like if you're just shoveling shit to no end, then like why? Like there's no prize for that. There's no prize for being the guy that had the shittiest life. Like, yeah, oh, woe is me. But at the same time, like you can put that effort, you can put that discomfort into some sort of delayed gratification that's going to pay off into the result that you want at some point, and that's fully in your control. Like I don't know, you and me, we're kids from the middle of nowhere with a fucking, probably had a better chance of ending up with a drug addiction. Now people listen to us talk on the internet, so it's like I don't know. It's there. There's no point in just doing the hard thing just to say you're doing the hard thing, and that's
Mm,
there's a big culture around that nowadays with the ice baths and like I don't know, like I don't know if hard 75 is a thing. Like we have to,
dude.
it's you have to read 10 pages of a book a day. Like if that's the stuff that motivates you, like your goals are probably so mediocre that you're not going to be happy. You're not going to be fulfilled when you accomplish them. Like set your sights on something that's fucking hard to do, but it means something to you and there's purpose in that. And then buy into the process around that because it's not, I don't necessarily love the process of running a business, but there's a lot of gratification that comes from that for me. And this is something like I wouldn't trade my life for anything else, but I've probably shoveled more shit than most people have and ever will. But I've bought into that process because I've seen the results that I get from it.
Yeah, there's this weird hubris that comes from a self-appointed puritanical shit shoveling king. And it's like, dude, at the end of the day, you're just on a pile of shit, dog. Like,
Yeah.
and it's almost like the shittier your life is, the more you are pure to the shit that you shovel. It's like this is actually really true in the strength and conditioning world, right? Like you'll talk to some, and I gotta be honest. The majority of people I talk to in that industry have, and at least to my face, and I think it to be true, have a tremendous amount of respect for the way you and I have navigated the social media space. And I've been told this time and again, where it's like, we still get on the plane to do the thing, work at the high level. Like you still, you and I've had this conversation with you, and I fucking God bless your soul a number of times in a month where I'm like, dog, when are you gonna hang it up? Like you're like, yo, I gotta go treat a patient. I'm like, why? Like, dude, you're good. Like you
Yeah.
put it, you're like, nah, man, I like to stay sharp. I like to. It's like, yeah, there's all the respect. The number of like, college level or sometimes like high school level strength coaches that have had a conversation with me in some passive aggressive manner about the utilization of social media and how it's like, I'm not really about that. I'm really about the training. It's like, see what you just did there? See what you did? You just told me that I'm not about the training, right? That I'm not about it because whatever, it's Instagram and podcasts and all that. I see what you did. But also I think it's recess is just over, motherfucker. So why don't you get back to work, bitch? And it's like, tell me that you're about it. Like that's the hard stuff, right? That's your 75 days hard. It's like, you know what is hard? The conversation you have to have with yourself to do the things necessary to get to where you want to go. What did you tell your high school guidance counselor? Fucking grade 10 fucking JV varsity outside linebackers coach or whatever the fuck you are? No, you didn't. You had bigger dreams, but you can't do the actual hard thing, right? You want to tell yourself, oh, 4:30 a.m. It's like, yeah, dog, I'm at 4:30 a.m. too. What's different than your 4:30, right? You're going to wipe noses. Yeah, I did that. And then I fucking got out of it. And it's not a me versus you. And I know guys who are in that position who they smell roses every single day. And they don't give me this back of the hand fucking, well, I'm a purist and you work on social media bullshit. They're like, yo, you're doing what you want to do. I'm doing what I want to do. Dab up. All right, recess is over. I got to go work. All right, all the respect in the world. But there is a lot of that in this industry that's like, oh, I started, training before there was self. Yeah, me too. I didn't have an Instagram account in grad school. I just worked faster than you did. You know what I mean? You had fucking 12,000 followers in 6 days. Like, it's just like, that's not a, it's not a testament to anything, right? Like, you don't get to stand on your shit pile that you shoveled for yourself and call yourself king. There's a hierarchy to this, and I'm sure these people had goals that were consistent with the lay of the land. And at a certain point, they just couldn't have those hard conversations with themselves. So they ended up making their own little molehill to call a mountain. And it's like, because you suffer. And here's something fundamental I was taught by a mentor of mine. Suffering is the story you tell yourself about your pain. Everyone hurts, not everyone has to suffer. And I watch people day in and day out tell themselves the same story. It's like, yeah, dude, we're all in pain. And it's the people who don't tell themselves the bullshit story that get something out of it. Ridiculous.
Yeah. Fuck.
Oh, dude.
That was good.
That was, you know what? Training's a metaphor for life. I like it.
It is.
So what the fuck did we talk about? Concurrent training. It's like, sure, whatever. I don't know. And I'm just mad. Just usually how these end. Usually these end before I throw. Hey, the camera didn't fucking drop out this time. That's big.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, silver linings and shit. Okay. This is what? Let's know if anyone's still around. It's Wednesday again. It's Groundhog Day. It's Wednesday the 20th.
20th.
Registration for Prescript Level 1 next semester goes up in early December. If you haven't yet, it's the only discount we have for the course. If you go to www.pre-script.com, on the homepage, click the link for the L1, you get the opt-in list discount. So you'll be the first to notified when the course goes live for sale in early December. If you are not on this list, the discount does not exist. Can't find it anywhere else but that opt-in list. So if you go prescript.com, sign up, you'll get notified when the course goes live, and that email list will get sent a specific discount code for next semester, which will be going live in early January. So hop on that. As usual, appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll be back next week with another episode. Closing thoughts, remarks?
I don't know, man. I'm callous, but have a high pain tolerance. I don't know. It's like you said, like everyone's suffering, everyone goes through their pain. Like, shovel the shit, like do what you have to do, but like do it to an end. It's like, understand where you're going with it, have some sort of goal in mind, have some sort of purpose, but don't be afraid to do the hard thing, and do the hard thing in the way that's going to get you what you want.
Boom. Love it. RX Radio. We'll see you next week.
We'll see it.